Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Merry Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas to the people where it is now past midnight, wherever you are in the world. My name is Chris Richardson, President and General Counsel of BDV Solutions. We're having a very special December 24th, Christmas Eve discussion. And today it's with a very special guest named Michael Valverde, who used to be over at USCIS. And so we're going to talk a little bit today just about immigration, answer some of your questions. But I'm going to let Mike, turn it over to him real quick to introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
All right. Good day to everyone. Merry Christmas, whatever you're celebrating. Hopefully you get some time to relax and celebrate. My name is Mike Valverde. I am, hopefully of interest and can answer questions that you have. I recently retired from the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, after 28 years. And then in that time, I had all sorts of positions. Most recently, I ran our field operations directorate, so what goes on in all of the 89 field offices in the U.S. was under my remit. Also, the EB-5 program as well. In my time, refugee work as well as immigrant petitions, so your EB petitions and a whole bunch more. And so what I'm doing now is working with Chris and others just to share my perspective and my knowledge of what goes on, I guess, behind the scenes at the USCIS. So I'm happy to be here. And again, Merry Christmas to everyone.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, obviously. But before we get to all of that, tell us a little bit about how you came to be at USCIS. Like, you were there for 28 years. What brought you to USCIS?
Yeah, I was a lifer. I always called myself. I really always found immigration and migration of interest. That's what I studied in my undergraduate. I think I shared with you earlier. I thought that was going to lead me to a career at the State Department, and I washed out a little bit at the start. So I went over to, at the time, the INS was hiring, and I joined up right out of graduate school. So probably that all roots back. My therapist would say maybe my father was from Bolivia. So I'm a family, first generation immigrant, first generation to go to college and get a degree. And I was just always drawn to the immigration and migration space. I wrote my graduate thesis on naturalization. So I'm a believer.
Great. And what so you worked at USCIS, you saw how it was from the inside for a number of years. How has it changed since the last 28 years? What have you seen in terms of changes at USCIS?
Yeah, it's a span of time. When I started, it was part of the INS, which was part of the Department of Justice. And then after 9/11, it was broken out into the organization that you see now. I can answer your question in a bunch of different ways. The first change, that I would say is that when I arrived there, it was a very paper-driven organization, right? There were paper files, there were legal pads, and information was, you had big books that you read and you updated, books on the rules and the regulations. And over the course of time, it just became much more digitized, and we use all the tools that everyone uses now to transact business faster and more comprehensively in the digital environment. So what that really allowed the agency to do was to start connecting the dots. So it became, when I was there, it was decisions about individual people, right? So you would rock up in front of us, Chris, and we would make a decision based on what we know about you. And then the next person and the next person. Over time, just the systems and the fact that it got digital allowed the agency to be much more smarter and take what we know about you and remember it till the next time we talk to you, take what we know about you and others before you and help us ask the next question. So, it just got a lot more smart, got a lot more professional, and it got a lot more consistent. I think probably users out there are shaking their heads when they hear the word consistent, but it's a lot more consistent than it used to be from my
Wow.
perspective.
So from in terms of efficiency, they're much more efficient than what they used to be, is what you're saying,
Yeah,
right?
no, yeah, certainly the whole digitization of everything allowed transaction times to just be a lot faster. Um, there's a ton of so much more demand on the services. So when see if I can give you a statistical example. When I started paying attention to the numbers, I was assigned to the temporary protected status portfolio, and I think we had about 30 or 40,000 people in all of the countries across the world who were in the U.S. who had temporary protected status. Last year, the tail end of the Biden administration, I think that was 3 or 4 million, and that's a good example, I think, of just how everything has blown up just in terms of numbers. So the agency has gotten bigger, but the demand on it is, insatiable. It just keeps growing.
No, it makes sense. It seems like there's just a lot more demand for immigration, and the system hasn't really, to me, it seems like it hasn't, changed in terms of the numbers since really 1990. And so you're really trying to make this system that smaller work. In your 28 years, how have you seen the visa bulletin change? What things have you noticed about the visa bulletin? What's changed? What do you think are some of the things that um, what do you think some of the things that USCIS has done because of the changes with the visa bulletin?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because that illustrates a lot of what I was talking about. Um, Over the years, the visa, in my experience, from my perspective, of course, the visa bulletin went from being something that the State Department ran and they watched the numbers and they made changes. And we heard about it at USCIS maybe a little bit before, but not too much before the general public heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we made adjustments and but over the years, it became obvious that on the employment-based side, USCIS used about 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 visas. So most of that was adjustment of status. If you think about someone who's here on an H-1B who's applying for EB-1A, they're not coming from abroad. They're here and they're adjusting status. So USCIS would use most of those numbers. Now, on the family side, is the exact opposite. State Department would do about 9 out of 10 family-based visas. So what I've seen over the years, especially after 2008, when the environment where what I just described at first, where the Department of State made a lot of the decisions, resulted in a bunch of dates being made current, and all the people in the United States were able to file for adjustment of status, but that immediately oversubscribed the bulletin. And there are people maybe on this call or maybe they had relatives or friends on this call who had to wait in the United States for years and years and years, unable to adjust, even though they had been able to file for adjustment. So sorry for the long answer, but that really helped us. It was the catalyst for both agencies, the consular and USCIS, to start talking to each other and sharing information and sharing our projections. How many are we going to approve next month? How many do we expect? And that has if you take the long view, that has resulted in a really steady set of visa bulletin movements. Right. Again, that's from my perspective. People watching it will say that it doesn't move very often, and when it does, it's not predictable. But from the government side, there's so much more data. There's so much improved ability to project that. This year, for example, we're seeing changes on approval rates and filing rates, and those are immediately being addressed in visa dates. So, for example, the start of the year, a bunch of categories moved forward and then they set for a while. And then this last, the January bulletin moved some categories a little bit more forward. And then, of course, the India EB1 numbers jumped about a year. And that's a result of the data driving the process. So it's really become just in the same theme that I was using before, much more professional, much more organized. My hope is that the agencies will have the courage to just show all their data on a more regular basis, and so that you all can predict, right? It's not a surprise every month. You
Yeah, yeah.
see.
It does seem like it's. I understand like the mystery behind it and why they have to keep it so hidden behind everybody. So it seems like a lot
Yeah.
to keep it a mystery. What do
Yeah.
you
I mean,
think of this?
oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, what do you think of the idea of like visa recapture, right? Like there's been a lot of people who are like, you know what, like either the Congress should pass something that recaptures all the old numbers, or executive branch should just say, you know what, we're recapturing all of these old numbers. Like, what do you
Yeah.
think of visa recapture?
First of all, I think it's ultimately going to be a political decision. If one party likes it, the other party doesn't. But even
Mhm.
when the party who likes it wants to do it, they're much more comfortable saying that it should take an act of Congress to say that you can go back and do it. Some of the more people who are progressive about this idea would
Mhm.
disagree and say that there's nothing in the law that prevents it. In fact, the law makes those numbers available every year, and why can't we say they stack up?
Mhm.
Um, as a practitioner, I just fall back on the training that I've had and lived by for years. For example, every fourth quarter at the end of every government fiscal year, which ends in September on September 30th,
Mhm.
the agencies will be rushing to use their numbers, right? So the agency
Right.
culture is that if you don't use it, it's lost. For
Mhm.
the past 3 or 4 years, the agencies have used all the employment-based numbers, and most, if I get this right, of the family-based numbers. But before that, during COVID, and even before that, there are a ton of numbers lost. And just
Mhm.
going back to where I come from, I am a believer that immigration of in all of its forms, right, family based and certainly employment based, makes the U.S. a stronger, more prosperous country. So I'm all for it. If that's ultimately your question, is I think we ought to be able to recapture. It is frustrating to me that the numbers and the schemes in the law are set as
Mhm.
hard numbers, and they were set decades ago,
Right.
and they don't have the ability to adjust with the economy. That has traditionally been Congress's purview.
Yeah.
Right now, Congress doesn't really pass a
Yeah.
lot of laws, especially in the
And
immigration space.
And even with the dependents and the fact that dependents are included in the employment numbers, it seems very odd. What, like, in terms of predictions for the coming year, with the 39 countries under travel ban, and you can't issue those cases, and with all the things going on with H-1B, do you anticipate that there's actually going to be a surplus of family-based cases that will bleed into the employment-based cases this year? Because to me, like if I were in government still, that would be like a minor concern. I heard
Yeah.
someone say as much as like 113,000, both family-based and employment-based cases might be freed up now because of the various travel bans. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, it's a concern. It's December, right? It's Christmas, so
Mhm.
not that there's ever a great time for a travel ban and all that comes with that. In terms of using the numbers, it's still early in the year, and the government can adjust. Short term ban, then a little harm but no foul, and all the numbers will be able to be used, and the
Mhm.
right countries will be able to get them. If the ban is lifted and the government goes through the work that it says it needs to do to feel secure in issuing those visas. But if it is a longer term ban,
Mhm.
then I think your question is spot on. If I were still in my old job, I would be watching those numbers each month and seeing,
Mhm.
um, again, what the fourth quarter is going to look like. So just behind the scenes a little bit, there's a very rigorous each month. We look at the numbers, we talk to State Department talks to us, we project how much we're going to approve, how much we're going to deny, what the rate of new applications for visas coming into the system are, and we can make some pretty good judgments about what's going to happen. But when there's something like a ban, when the rules are changed to make approvals more difficult to get, then it goes from being pure math to pure math plus guessing. And better, yeah, again, like I said, better to start those guesses earlier in the year than later in the year. But it will make for a summer where as you get towards the end of the year, again, I'm being a little long-winded on this point, the government can start to give itself permission to use numbers, and if they're not, to use numbers in ways they wouldn't do earlier in the year. So break some of the categories and move some of the numbers around. We're not going to do that in December, but that's the kind of thing that we do in July and August, if necessary. So if the ban is short, probably the government will recover and everyone will get their visa this year. If it's longer, then there'll be some evasive action steps, but those will probably occur in July. And that's when you'll see the category and the visa numbers really
start to fluctuate.
Fluctuate.
Yeah. So if we see this travel bans continue, and you see that the numbers are still looking kind of dicey in terms of issuances, then you might see things move forward much faster. Would be my guess too. I think that I suspect that's right, and that's certainly what I've heard in the State Department. Before I jump to questions from folks, I did want to ask you: were you around back in 2005 or 2006? When I believe USCIS or the State Department just made all the cases current. Like they just rolled up and said, you know what, everything's just current. We don't care, we're making everything current. I assume that was incredibly illegal, although I would have loved it today, and I doubt that they could get away with that now. But what was the reason for that when they just suddenly made everybody current? Like what happened?
I will say I was around. I wasn't in the room, so this is secondhand, not primary source. But yeah, I think normally when the numbers move, there's a lot of concern. Will they have enough of volume to use all the visas? But that wasn't what happened back in the mid 2000s when they did that. I think there was some people, what I always heard, there were some people in the State Department who were skeptical about the agency's ability to use all of its numbers. And there was some skepticism about how much work they had available. But like you said, they didn't just sort of incrementally move it up to get that. They cleared the decks and moved it forward. I always read it as like a pro economy, pro business. There are some people who think, and not without some merit, that that gets qualified people in the door. They get permission to work. They get permission to stay. And if the numbers move back, they're in the economy. They're working. And when the numbers move forward, we'll catch them up. The reality was that's okay for 90 days, 120 days, 1 year. But for like a decade and a half, there are people, again, probably folks on this call who are stuck there, and, good for them, I guess, if they made it when their number came back current. I will say when that happened, here's my behind the scenes story. Or maybe this is well known, but I remember seeing this. They made it current. And when people realized it was real, the director's office at USCIS is an office suite, right? The fanciest office with the biggest window. And they have an entry area and staff who greet you. I walked in there for my next meeting, whatever, a day or two later. It was filled with flowers. There were bouquets of flowers in every space. I mean, I've never seen anything like it before. Since in every space they could set something down, it was covered with a bouquet of flowers. It would just spontaneously, or maybe it was organized, but sent flowers. Probably the same thing happened at Consular.
Oh yeah, well listen, if you still have friends over there, if they will, I'll send the biggest bouquet of flowers in the world if they were to open up the government and make everything current again. Like if they just all woke up and make it current, I'll send them all the flowers they want, Mike.
No, I will say there's a lot of doom and gloom in this space about the regulatory changes and the administration, some statements they make about immigration. But the visa bulletin speaks a little bit of a different story, right? The numbers keep moving. It suggests that they are intent on using all available immigrant visas. And, that 12-month shift on India EB1 really, again, speaks to that intent. So not all doom and gloom.
What do you think? So you were in government for a while. I was in government for a little bit of time too. if somebody comes up to you and says, "Man, that visa bulletin seems so long, or this process seems so long, like I don't think these people are ever going to get their green cards. Like it just seems like it's forever." Like, what is your reaction to that? What is your response to immigrants who, or potential immigrants who might be skeptical because they're like, you know what, it's just going to take forever.
Yeah. Well, as you know, and as folks on this call know, there are categories where it doesn't seem like a credible scheme, where you have to get at the end of such a long line, and it's governed by the quantities that they allow per year, right? It's just math and division to say, oh my goodness, I'll be a grandparent before that number becomes current. And maybe, if I get here and have a child, my child will be able to sponsor me before my original priority date becomes current. So, I get the frustration. Like, the first thing I think of, it's not a useful not a useful response to those individuals. But it is just the law and the immigration scheme was just set up in a completely different time, when the volumes were less, when the population of the country was a lot less. And the answer to that is changing the law, which is equally frustrating because we haven't had a lot of significant legislative changes in this area for a long time. And this isn't the Congress to be opening up the gates wider. This is, immigration is just such a touchy subject right now. So, it is frustrating. There are categories out there that take forever. Some of the policies and regulations are aware of that, and you can use your priority date, but adjust your petition. And when things, there are some rules that are working in people's favor. Congress, sort of got there a little bit with AC 21 back now 2 decades ago. But it's a frustrating system. It's antiquated, and it's due for some updates. I just don't know that I see that on the horizon.
Yeah. What I usually tell people, just get your thoughts on it, is that, the line appears long now, but you have no idea what's going to happen in a couple of years, right? Like, these things tend to have a pendulum effect. And, if Congress and the president do get off of their butts, and I think that there's enough reason for them to do that, maybe not now, but certainly in 2, 3, 4 years, if there's enough reason to do it, the people that got in line first are the ones that are going to benefit, right? Like they're the ones that are going to, or if the government wakes up one day and makes everything current again, you just don't know, right? And so to me, it seems like it's, I've never heard of nobody has come to me and said, man, I regret that I started this and then I got my green card, right? Like no one's ever like, man, it's the people that actually got in line back in 2020, 2019, 2021, 2022. And it is moving, right? It moves fast sometimes, it moves slow, but it is moving in the direction. So best to get in line. And then I'm going to ask you just one more question, and then we're going to switch over to questions online. But, there's a lot of immigration lawyers, consultants, agents, lots of different people that do immigration. What would you advise people out there who are trying to decide, which lawyer to use, which company to talk to? What are some of the things that you're seeing? And I preface it by saying that I know a lot of people on this call are either our competitors. I can see our competitors actually listening in, or even like people who are working currently with our competitors, but actually need, valid information on what to do with immigration. From your perspective in government, what did you see were some of like the things that scared you about immigration consultants or immigration lawyers?
There's so much there. So great question, especially these days, right? These days, the rules are changing. The consequences of technical non-compliance are magnified. So, figuring out who you can listen to and who you can trust for your immigration questions is key. There are, thousands of people who will give you advice. And, I always say like a doctor, like a diagnosis, right? It's never a bad idea to get a second opinion, and then it's common sense stuff, right? If they promise 100% success, that's probably not what what you want to hear, right? You want to be able to talk to people. You want to be able to have them listen to you and understand that, each scenario is different, even if they've been through, EB1A or NIW or O1 or whatever, 1,000 times. You want someone who takes the time to listen to your particular situation and gives you advice that sounds right. There's a lot of people out there who will, like I said, promise success, promise speed. Just be wary of that. Get a second opinion, get a third opinion as you need to, because I'll end where I started. These days, the cost of an error is
Huge.
pretty high. Yeah,
It's huge. And I'll tell you, Mike, that when I started in EB3, so BDV has been around since 2013, and most of the companies that we started with are gone. Most of the companies that I started with when I was at BDV are gone, right? Most of these companies, like they charge these immigrants a ton of money, and then they vanished. And that's always one thing that people need to be very aware of is how long have these people been around? Because you have a lot of people who will profess themselves to be immigrant experts, who profess themselves to know stuff, but once they get their money, there's really no incentive for them to stick around and stick in business, right? And immigration, because it's taking so long, managing relationships, having contacts in government, or people rather who understand the way this stuff works, is more important than ever, right? Because again, when I started with EB3, BDV wasn't even the largest EB3 company out there. There was two other companies that were far larger than ours, and both of them are gone. And they basically left all these foreign nationals and employers just holding the bag, and they took all the money and vanished. And I think that's one thing I often hear from. We get a lot of stuff from our who work with our competitors, and they say, the company isn't contacting me anymore. I can't reach anybody anymore. Like, I hear this all the time from people, and I tell them, well, listen, once they get a certain amount of money, some people are just happy with that, right? Like they basically just try to manage it like as a 1 or 2 or 3 person shop, and they hope that they can give you enough good advice that it kind of just goes in from next year to the next year. But this stuff is really it's an investment in people's time and money and years, right? You have to really be. I've been doing this for 15 years now. You've been doing this, Mike, for 28. We've been in the immigration space for a really long time. It's easy to find us. But there are people who are just like come in, they take your money, and then they leave. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of that. I've seen even the biggest immigration consulting firms, quote unquote, belly up and leave and just vanish overnight. And no one can reach anybody, and you don't know where they are. And so I think from your experience, Mike, have you heard or seen those while you were in government, or saw investigations into those?
100%. Both, so on a case-by-case basis. So one of the things I did back in my career was work at the Administrative Appeals Office. And you could tell, every case was different, and they would all be looked at. But by the name of the representative or the lawyer or the firm, you could tell what kind of work you were going to get. So it's absolutely a known quantity. You're a known quantity. If your product is good, if your product is not good, it's absolutely known among practitioners. Oh, yeah. And these days, do your research, right? If you spend 10 or 15 minutes in Reddit, you can find out a lot about the results, right? It's all about outcomes and results. And as Chris said, the relationship, right? It's not a one and done. It's you have your petition, you have your interview, you have your admission, and then your whole immigration in the U.S. Path after that, right? It is a long-term thing, and the receipts are out there, right? So doing your research, don't believe the hype and the promises unless the receipts are back there. But from the government side, absolutely, we would refer people to local bar associations or local U.S. attorneys because you could see a lot of the unlawful practicing. A lot of would roll up and say, "Here's my case," and they would, once you see 2 or 3 people filing for something, and they tell the same story, and it's a story about someone taking their money and saying if they just filed this, they'd get permission to stay or permission to work. It's not the individual's issue. It's that company or practitioner. So it's pretty obvious from the agency side when you're not supported by sort of quality or
quality representatives and people who've worked who've done this for a while, and it always seems like easy not to talk to a lawyer, not have a lawyer. But that's a question I always ask. Like, if you're working with one of these other agents, talk to a lawyer. Like, ask them, like, hey, who's your lawyer? Who's legally backing you? Who's advising you, right? And if they tell you it's just me, or like, hey, I can call somebody, it's like, no, get somebody on the line. Let me know who specifically are you working with. But thanks for that, Mike. And I think that's something I saw in government as well. It's just a lot of people just putting themselves in a really bad position of working with companies and working with others that just don't have like their best interests, and they may even have their best interests at heart, but they just don't have like the competent level of legal expertise around them that can actually get you through bad times. Because like, with immigration, it's easy to work when the times are good, right? Like, that's the thing I say about our company, BDV and Argo, is like, oh yeah, when things are great, that's great, but you don't want a company and knowing what the company does when times are good. You really want to know what are they going to do when times are bad, right? And so for us, what we do is like, if your case is current, it's been current a long time, and it's not moving, you reach out to me. Maybe we'll do a mandamus lawsuit. We have like lots of attorneys who are experts in mandamus lawsuits. Maybe we'll ask somebody, maybe this field service director down in Florida. Maybe we can help you with this. There's different strategies that we can all come up with when times are bad. And I think that that's the most important thing. And again, not every time. Sometimes times are just bad, and there's nothing really we can do about it. But I'm going to try, and I'm going to tap into this knowledge network. I'm going to talk to Mike. I'm going to talk to Leon Rodriguez, former USCIS director. I'm going to talk to a ton of people to see if we can figure out how to get your case moving. But there's a lot of people out there who are just like, what do you mean? Like, you want to talk to me when times are bad now? But no, you want to work with people when times are bad. This year, Mike, we got 300 green card approvals at BDV. 300 green card, or help 300 people get their green cards approved this year. And not all of them were easy. A lot of them were really, really hard. A lot of them had to wait a long time, and we just had to be there right there with them. And so it's really important that people do that homework, find out, what are their track records, what have they done, and what are they going to do when times actually get hard, right? Are they actually going to make calls for you? Can they make calls for you? Do they have a immigrant experience that they can tap into? But I'm going to go over and ask and answer a couple of questions. Okay, so someone asked, please let me know how to show home ties on C1D crew member visa. I was rejected. So former visa officer, home ties can be anything to a visa officer, right? So it could be you have a house. It could be mostly you have, spouses, children. Basically, when you think of a home tie, you really want to think about what is it that's compelling you to return to your home, whether you're C1D or B1 or even F1. Still, really, when you're thinking about home ties, you have to think about what's going to compel me to come back to my home country. Now, I will say though, with visa rejections, people get that form that says 214B home ties or whatever. That's really a catch-all. It can literally mean anything, right, as a visa officer. And so I gave the same form to everybody, but I may have had like multiple different reasons for rejecting that case, right? And so when people tell me, oh, I got rejected because of my home ties, and you see, this is what the sheet said, I tell them that we give out millions of those sheets per year. It's the same exact sheet across the world. And so, really when you think about why you were rejected, really don't necessarily focus on what's in that sheet. Focus on what were the questions that were asked. Mike, did you want to jump in or add anything to that?
Well, I would just the difference between consular, and I was always very jealous of this, Chris, honestly, when we denied someone in USCIS, we had to write exactly why we were denying them. And often we had to give people a chance to overcome those reasons. So, on your comment, I think you're right. Home ties, as I understand, is all about the narrative. If you have a good story you can tell that makes sense to the consular officer, that says, of course, I'm going to come back to Nepal or wherever I'm from after my studies are over, after my visit, because of X, Y, and Z, and it fits, right? It makes sense. Then that's what they're looking for, right? It's got to make sense, and it's got to be a narrative that works for you.
Now, somebody on here is asking about Schedule A processing. Did you ever see a lot of Schedule A It seems pretty rare among both immigration attorneys and people in government. Can you talk a little bit just about, from your experience, what Schedule A is, and bypassing the um, the Department of Labor process
Yeah,
with
the labor
Schedule A?
certification. Yeah, no, I was
Yeah, yeah,
trying to
yeah.
scroll up for the question. It's not unheard of. It is rare. Oh, there it
Yeah.
is. Going through Schedule A process, premium processing from up. Yeah, if you're doing premium, if that's the question at 1:06 p.m. from MDIKICI,
Hmm.
you should expect to get your answer within the premium time frame. They're still on top of that. As you might know, as everyone probably does know, it's
Hmm.
15 calendar days, so it's a little longer than it was a few years ago. And I've heard from some attorneys within the last few months that you really expect to get it on the last possible calendar day or get a request for evidence late in the process. But there are a lot of people who are getting their answers in 5 or 6 days or a week. So, this is a wishy-washy answer. But to your question, you can expect approval during the premium. If you get approval, you can expect a decision during the premium time frame. And whether it's Schedule A or not, the agency will look at, here's the wishy-washy part, the contents of your petition, and make their decision. There have been a lot more requests for
Hmm.
evidence in
Yeah.
this area than ever. So don't be surprised if you get a request for evidence. And
Hmm.
that's actually good. It's like a roadmap to approval. If you can answer all the questions. But yeah, I would
Hmm.
expect that you get an answer during the 15
No,
business
no,
days
well,
after
15,
after
15
you
business
apply.
days. Yep. Someone asked about Latvia, and can you apply for a tourist visa after you've been rejected for two student visas? Yes, you can. You can apply for any visa at any time, but it just really depends on what, like Mike said, what are your circumstances, what story is there behind those circumstances. Now, if you were rejected from the F1 student visa because you might have been in the U.S. and committed a crime before, had issues before, whatever caused that F1 rejection is probably going to cause the tourist visa rejection too. And so I often tell people, before you apply for that visa again, really be thinking about, why did they refuse me the last time? Now, we've seen on the Argo side, we had someone who was rejected 11 times for a visa, and we helped them get across the board and got them their visa. But you just need to figure out, and that's what we're good at, is figuring out what are the reasons why you were potentially protected. Someone asked, they're from Jordan and would like help with the process. So I hope someone from my sales team will jump in and answer Saif about the Chicago, Illinois area, and any sponsors we have in that area, or any sponsors we may have in that area. Another question is if EB3 unskilled program will be continued under President Trump. So EB3, all the EB programs have been around a long time. They've been around for 30 years. They're bipartisan. And we've already been through one Trump administration. And so I imagine that, we're going to see an EB3 program at the end of it. Now, obviously, if there's COVID, or obviously if there's some major national disaster, you could see these policies or programs being delayed. But ultimately, these programs have been around for a very, very long time, and will continue to be so, and to continue to do so. I think. What do you think, Mike?
No, I agree. I mean, they're going to continue. The question is about the president. What the administration is doing is tinkering, changing, amending some of the rules and regulations for how to access EB3 and EB1 and EB2. So look for that. That's what I was trying to get at earlier. Things are going to change. There'll still be EB3. There'll still be need for those workers in the law, a way to get there, but probably some of the requirements will change. So that's why you're going to want to just proceed carefully and take as much information as you can. But yeah,
Right.
just to go
No,
on.
exactly right. And somebody asked about, I know that you're not a DOL guy, so I'll chime in on this as well. But someone asked about, do I expect that the DOL processing times will reduce? Yes, I actually do think that DOL, there's a big, probably one of the few parts of the government that actually wants to do, and I get USCIS does too, but DOL definitely wants to reduce its wait times. It already has. And DOL is one of those weird agencies where, and I think you've seen this, Mike, over the years, where some years it's like 18, 19 months, and then they wake up and then they turn things on, and then it's like, 2, 3 months again, and it goes back up and it shrinks again. But the current DOL leadership is really committed to reducing the backlogs and the wait times. And so I think that we're gonna see that. Somebody also asked about, they got 3 H-2Bs in the past and 2 J-1 visas in the past, and kind of why your H-2B was rejected now, even though you don't have any violations or overstays. What I tell people is that, one, just especially now in this environment, just because you've had approvals before doesn't mean that you're going to get approvals tomorrow or the next day, right? It's new officers, there are new rules, there are things that are out there that may not have done that. And so what I recommend is that you talk to one of our RGOFs, talk to one of our former visa officers, kind of figure out why you were rejected. Because what we do is we go through the whole interview. We go through, ask the specific questions, and really figure out what happened. Why was this person rejected? And then from there, you can form a strategy on how to comport yourself in the next interview. And I get that. And if someone's asking about President Trump again and the hard line regarding immigrants, so even if President Trump definitely does have a hard line on immigration and immigrants, like that's something that we all are very aware of. But ultimately, the president has also said that he understands the importance of legal immigrants. He understands the importance of the legal immigration system. And, the immigration system goes through periods where there are presidents that definitely don't want to support it as much. But like Mike said, they are still issuing green cards. They're still issuing visas. They're still going through the process. And I think that getting yourself in the line is ultimately what I recommend for everybody, right? Like I've been talking to people for almost a decade now at EB3, and I am positive that everyone I talked to a decade ago wishes they had just done it back then, right? They wish they had signed up back when they first talked to me about it and not waited, because ultimately, the immigration process moves fast, it moves slow. There may be things that'll make it move even slower, but then there'll be things that'll make it move faster. And we just don't know, right? And so it's best that you get yourself in that line, get yourself ready and prepared to go from there. Let's see. Someone asked about, do you think, let's see, date. Yeah, the September 21, if your final action date and your current date for filing is in 2021, 2022, early 2022, I think that you're probably going to be current, fairly soon, hopefully. But that's all guesswork on my end. But I think, like Mike said, I think that we're going to see a lot more movement, especially if these travel bans, continue. And Mike, I'll ask you this question. What does USCIS do in terms of background checks? Do they check banking statements? What do they do during their visa? I know what they do during our visa interviews for consular, but what do they do during a USCIS visa interview or USS interview?
Yeah, so great question. As probably everyone on the call knows, there's the visa petition part that USCIS does, and that is really just is the company and the job and the individual all a match, right? And then the interview, right? If you're adjusting status in the U.S. or whatever, that's where they look at you, right? And do you have the qualifications that you said you did? Do you have a criminal or an overstay immigration issue background? And those are the main things, right? They look to verify that the petition approval was correct, but 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, there's not a lot of issues there. But they really take a hard look at you and what they know about you, and that's why you if you're in the U.S. and you're filing for adjustment of status, get your green card, they'll take your fingerprints again. They'll make sure that your fingerprints are reviewed in all sorts of law enforcement systems. And one of the things that I've seen, maybe this is another answer to your original question about what I've seen over the years, is that those background checks are getting deeper and deeper, and it's really irrespective of who's the president, right? You can, a lot of people will say this president really cared about this and this president didn't, but the agency and the civil servants are always trying to make sure they're making the best decision. And if there's information about someone that's accessible digitally, they're going to seek it. And just because of data and data sharing and all of that, the background checks are deeper and deeper. And then now recently, late in the Obama administration and through the first Trump administration, the Biden, and now this Trump administration, something like social media is also being looked at. So they're deep. And I think they're pretty consistent with what happens on the consular side, but they're trying to find out everything that they can about you so that they can see if your story that you're telling them is consistent, right? And they look at the notes that Chris Richardson wrote about you when he interviewed you for your first B1, 15 years ago or whatever, to see if that marriage and that family that you're describing that you have now is consistent with that. And if not, they'll ask you questions. So it's really important to be consistent throughout, and to walk into any interview, whether it's at the State Department or at USCIS, knowing that they're going to ask you questions, and listen to your answers. But a lot of the questions they're asking, they already know the answer to. So they're really seeing what you're going to say. And so it's really smart to practice ahead of time, to think about how your story, and I don't mean like a made up story. I mean, your
actual story.
Your actual story that have led you to this moment makes sense and hang together. Because they know your immigration history, certainly, but more and more they know other parts of your history, where you lived, certainly if you're arrested or not, and all that other stuff. So they're deep. So you should walk into the room knowing that they know a good bit about you, and it shouldn't scare you. That's their job, but they could ask you about anything.
What and this is a theme in several of the questions. What triggers like an RFE? Like what triggers on your end at USCIS? What is it in a case, like especially EB3 or any of the cases, that makes you think, oh, I'm going to go refer this to an RFE? And this is a two-part question. That's the first one. What triggers an RFE? If you're doing a visa, if you're doing the interview itself at USCIS, right? What would trigger an officer to be like, I don't believe anything this person is saying, and I want to do additional review?
Yeah. So what I was always jealous about from the USCIS perspective, I'm sure life as a consular officer was incredibly difficult, but I was always jealous that the refusals could be as quick and less documented, for lack of a better way to express that, than what we had to do. So, I raise that here to say if the agency, if USCIS issues you a request for evidence or wants to do another interview, they have to show their cards, right? And so with a request for evidence or notice of intent to deny, they can't just say, we don't believe you. They have to say, you said X, Y, and Z, and we have reason to believe A, B, and C that that's not true, and give you a chance to connect the dots and say, no, X, Y, and Z and A, B, and C can be both true, and here's why it works, or here's the piece of paper that says it is. So to answer your question, though, there can be just documentary shortfalls, right? We need to see another year of your tax return you filed, and then the next year rolled around, and now the next returns are available, so we want to update it, or a medical review. But more on the substantive side, for green card cases, a lot of the requests for evidences and requests for evidence and notices of intent to deny, on the substantive side, will be about, if it's an employment-based, your qualification or your employer's intentions. You say they're going to employ you full-time, but you've given us employment records that show you've been averaging 15 hours a week for the last year. How do we assure ourselves that this is full-time employment, or that sort of technical, substantive issue on your case? But the good news is, like I said, RFEs and even notices of intent to deny are like roadmaps for what you need to show to get right. 9 cases out of 10 get approved, and a greater percentage of that get requests for evidence. But if
Mhm.
you are a legitimate case and your employer's, yeah, we're not employing you full time now, but we committed to employ you full time when you get your green card, and here's our plan. It's a statement from the employer. And if you get that request for evidence and you go back to your employer and you get that, then you move forward. So I don't know if this is the right answer to your question, but
No, no,
either
no.
technical or substantive things, but they're going to tell you what it is, and you're going to get a chance to fill in the record and rebut it and show them that it's legitimate.
Yeah. No, I think that's 100% right, Mike. And I think DOL is kind of the same way.
Yeah,
Are there policies? Someone asked about,
yeah,
does it really take that long to process a case in DOL? The answer is no.
yeah,
There have been multiple lawsuits that have shown through FOIA requests that, I think DOL, if they wanted to, they could probably issue these things in 5 minutes, right? Like, or 4 minutes, right? There's some like de minimis time period where they could really just issue everything under the sun they wanted to, but they don't because, in my perspective, that because DOL is not fee generating, like, meaning that USCIS charges fees, the State Department charges
yeah,
fees, DOL is free, right? And you kind of have a free rider problem where because it's free, the government's just kind of like, well, we're just going to take a long time to process them, because we can. And some would say that it's a way to get the government to actually change and make
yeah.
a DOL, not, free anymore. That, if people started paying, we could see more processing. But on your end, Mike, did you ever see any processes at USCIS that actually could be pretty fast and easy, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that was the existence I had for the past 5 or 10 years in USCIS field operations. And I think we got to a better place than when I started. But that's just go to the end of the immigration process, and an application for citizenship in all of its parts. If you took a stopwatch, right? It's days of time, maybe a month, because we ask you to schedule an appointment to get your fingerprints taken, and that takes a little bit of time. But what the limiter is everyone must be interviewed. That's a requirement in the
Mhm.
law. And if 1 million people apply and there's only 1,000 people who interview, just to have made up numbers, but they're not too far from the truth. Um, and an average person can do about 1,000 interviews a year. It's going to take about a year to get your application done. And that's not because each step is going to take 3 months and then 4 months, but all the steps are going to happen, and then it's going to wait until you can get an interview, right? And so there's this dead time, after all the actual work is done, when you're waiting in your queue. So, that's been my experience at USCIS. We've worked really hard over the years to make each of those steps take less and use technology. And a lot of those steps are happening. A lot of the processing steps are happening on a parallel basis because it's no longer this paper file that moves from place to place. But at the end of the line, if too many people apply and we haven't done our job to hire enough people or to train them,
Mhm.
or there are different priorities, then there's a queue. I used to say when I was in my old job, we got it down for naturalization to a roughly anywhere between a 3 to 6 month wait. And I felt good
Mhm.
about that until I left the government. And just in my personal life, I applied for an organization that I am a member of to be a nonprofit. And the IRS told me it was going to take 12 months. And I was really upset about that. I was like, oh, that's how people must have felt all those years that I was saying 6 months isn't a big deal. I mean, any time is a big deal. But largely
Yeah.
at USCIS, and I imagine at labor too, it's not the length of the actual steps they need to take.
Right.
Getting in front of a
Right.
human to say yes, A, B, and C are there, and it's approvable.
No, that makes sense, Mike. And then, well, one, there's like a lot of like really personal questions, like you should probably talk to an immigration attorney or call us or, email us in private, if you have like really detailed personal questions, about the process. But we're coming up on an hour, Mike. I did want to get your predictions, given all you know about our government, knowing what what are your predictions for what's going to happen, next year in 2026?
Great. So, I said, I think there's a lot of doom and gloom out there when you think about immigration and legal immigration, even because a lot of the rules are changing, and some of the leadership at the different agencies have announced different policies or plans to have different policies that really affect a lot of the categories that people in the chat are asking about. And that's true, right? We're one year into a 4-year administration that is um, vocal about changing the immigration program to their priorities. And they have not changed the law, right? EB3 is still there, EB1 is still there, national interest waiver. But there's a lot of regulatory and policy changes that are adding complications. So, my prediction is there'll be more changes like that. There'll be more complications, whether that makes it harder or just different. You're going to want to be aware and get support and take opinions about how to maneuver through those changes if they affect a category that you're in. And some of the changes are good news changes. Like I said, I mentioned the fact that the government is intent based on watching its actions in using all the visa numbers it can use, right? The numbers have moved forward generally. EB3s are always sort of a steady stop and start category, but EB1 and others are moving. EB5 took a big jump. And similarly, and I think you mentioned it earlier, the Department of Labor has made its intentions known to get faster. They've also worked with USCIS on the H2A and H2B categories to do some parallel work that should allow a lot of the processing times to happen at the same time, and thus shorten some of the wait times that people have. So within the doom and gloom that you hear if you go and read about this stuff, there are signs that the government is still working every day. In certain categories, approval rates haven't changed, so they're still approving what they approved. They're still denying what they denied, and in others, there's been a drop off, and that's just data that's out there. But there's so my prediction is, I guess, there'll be more of the same. It's going to keep changing. Being on top of the changes is going to be more important than ever, because when it becomes your turn in whatever line you're waiting in, being up to date on how they're looking at social media, or are you a good member of your community, or how you demonstrate that you're going to return after your non-immigrant stay, is really important. But the good prediction is there are still a bunch of people working to speed all those processes up, despite all of the changes. So
Absolutely.
a bit of a mixed bag, but yeah, I think change is my main prediction. You name the category, it's going to change for better or worse, depending on where you sit.
And I will say that just from our perspective, we have a government relations team. They talk to folks at DOL, they talk to people at USCIS, and you're 100% right. And I'm sure you know people from USCIS. I know people from the State Department. The people there are committed to meeting the numbers. They're committed to making sure that the numbers are met. They're committed to making sure all the visas are issued. That has not changed. They're not waking up being like, we don't want to issue any green cards. That hasn't happened. And so that's a positive. My predictions are going to be that, one, I do think the visa bulletin is going to move ahead. I think that these travel bans are here to stay. If you're in one of those countries, I think that just means your cases are just going to be in abeyance. It's just going to be pending for a while. But I do think that you're going to see not just that the visa bulletin is going to move ahead because of that, but you're probably also going to see family-based numbers spilling into EB numbers in 2027, because I do not believe that they're going to be able to. I think they're going to try, but I think that just with everything going on, it might be a little bit tougher to do that. So I think that that's what people should be looking for. But I do agree with you that there's just going to be a lot more changes, a lot more stuff. More rules, more this, maybe more gold cards. Who knows? I think I'm going to close on that. What do you think of the gold card, Mike? Like, what do you think is going to happen with that?
Well, they seem to have settled on it being an EB1 and EB2 category. To me, it's up to litigation, right? If I were filing for an EB1A and I guess if you're waiting in line already, you're not impacted by gold card applicants. But if you're a new one, you are inconvenienced by the fact that gold
100%.
card
Yeah.
exists. So I think saying that there are a bunch of people who will be able to express a harm caused by this and challenge it in court. And then the judges will have to say if the administration has the authority to read the regulations for EB1 and EB2 such that they can have a gold card. So I think it'll live or die in court. And if it's like anything else, the people who are making the complaint will find a court that's probably sympathetic, thank you, to their concerns. So there'll be initially, it'll be enjoined, and then there'll be a real fight in, at the Washington, D.C. appeals court or even the Supreme Court. So litigation, definitely litigation.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about immigration people have to realize is that when people are like, oh, Trump might get rid of EB3 altogether, like Trump also said he was getting rid of TPS for these people. He was getting rid of and courts stepped in and said, no, you're not. And so even though the president may say he wants to do X, courts are generally going to be the last decision makers on a lot of this stuff. And even if a court says yes to the first thing, they might say no to the second, third, or fourth thing. And there are multiple courts working all these things. And so, in fact, I think that's one of the reasons why the president does what he does, is because he throws as many things out there as possible, because he knows that courts are going to challenge them, courts are going to restrict them, courts are going to I remember during the first Trump administration, I think multiple TPSs were revoked that ended up not being revoked because the court said, no, you need to do this, you need to do that. You can't do this then, you can't do that then. And so that's the one big, the president himself is an X factor, but there's also that Y factor of the courts basically stepping in and saying, actually, you can't do that.
Yeah, I think that's so spot on. The data show it too. We had I've seen this data for the first Trump administration, and I'm sure it exists for the Biden administration in some other field. But the first 12 months of the first Trump administration, like RFE and denial rates went up, and then one by one they were challenged in court, and some succeeded, but a lot of them didn't. And by the end of the Trump administration, the chart for RFEs was back down to where it was before at the end of the the end of the Obama administration. So the courts often have the last say in these matters.
Absolutely.
And sometimes the administration moves on, right? They'll have their battle and then they'll move on to the next thing. And that's, again, not a Republican or Democrat thing. That's just a political lifespan thing, I guess.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Mike, so much. This was really, really enjoyable. We've been doing this for an hour now. I hope everybody has happy holidays. And if we don't see each other again, happy New Year. It's always been a pleasure, I think, for Mike and I to use our immigration knowledge and insider expertise to help, navigate the immigration system. Is really a joy and a pleasure for me, and I think for Mike as well. Mike, did you want to close up or say anything as we close?
I would just say thanks for having me. I echo that. I found that I really enjoy showing people what happens inside government. It's a hard thing to see when you're not there. So I love that. So thanks for the opportunity. Happy New Year to everyone and to yourself. Just appreciate the chance.
Perfect. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much. Have happy holidays. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.